Ethanol will absolutely be part of the answer, as will biofuels, as will other non-conventional sources, as will more exploration for conventional oil and gas. But in the end, all of those things won't make up the shortfall that we're headed for in production of oil. There is no silver bullet. The answers to dealing with peak oil are about using less fuel and about laying out our cities in such ways that we don't need to use cars the way we have.
Already, as prices have soared, consumers are changing their habits, buying fewer large cars, lining up to buy hybrids. But changing the layout of the typical Australian or American city, constructed entirely around the use of the private car, is a project for at least a generation. And that's time we may not have.
The cars are there, the planes are there, the trains are there. You simply cannot change all of that overnight. You've got to have some time to be able to transition to better things. And by the way, every option has got problems. There are disadvantages to nuclear, there are disadvantages to coal, there's disadvantages to natural gas, there are severe disadvantages to biomass, and until we straighten that out and decide what we want to do longer term, we've got to stay alive.
Robert Hirsch lives in the respectable town of Alexandria, across the Potomac River from Washington, D.C. He's a respectable man, an eminent consultant who was commissioned by the US Department of Energy to write a report on how to mitigate the possible effects of peak oil. The more he looked at the problem, Hirsch told me, the more alarmed he became. It may be 30 years before peak oil confronts the world, or it may be happening now.
The worst case is that it's occurring now or very soon because the world is unprepared. It's absolutely unprepared. There are no quick fixes in something like this.
Robert Hirsch points out that while private enterprise is going flat out to develop the tar sands of Alberta, there is no full-scale coal liquefaction plant anywhere outside South Africa. Massive undertakings like this, even if the technology is known, take a decade to plan and develop.
There's just no question. We looked at crash programs in everything that made sense that's ready to go now, and it still takes 20 years to have a large impact. If you're an optimist, and I consider myself an optimist, then you want to think that everything's going to be fine. I want to think things are going to be fine. But if you're a realist and you think about the risks of being wrong, the downsides are enormous. If we get this wrong, we are all in very serious trouble.
What sort of trouble?
Well, if you look at what happened in 1973 and 1979, we had recessions, we had large unemployment, we had inflation, we had very serious economic problems, and those were brief interruptions. The peaking of world oil production will not be brief. And it can be like the Depression in the 1930s. We didn't cease to exist at that point, but the pain was terrible for a long time.